The weight of silence. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound that mattered anymore. Each electronic pulse reminded me I was still here, still breathing, still fighting, even when no one else seemed to care. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 weeks ago, I was living what I thought was a perfectly ordinary life. I worked as a high school chemistry teacher, came home to my husband David every evening, helped our teenage daughter Emma with her homework, and made weekend plans with David's parents, Margaret and Frank, who lived just 20 minutes away. We were the kind of family that looked perfect in Christmas photos. All smiles, matching sweaters, arms wrapped around each other like we actually meant it. But lying here in this ICU bed, with tubes snaking from my arms and machines keeping careful watch over every vital sign, I've learned something that perhaps I should have known all along. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones capable of hurting you the deepest. It started with what the doctors called an unusual presentation. That's medical speak for, we have no idea what's wrong with you, but you're definitely dying. The symptoms began subtly: fatigue that coffee couldn't cure, joint pain I attributed to grating too many papers hunched over my desk, and a persistent headache that felt like someone was slowly tightening a vice around my skull. I pushed through it for weeks. Teachers don't get sick days, not really. There's always another lesson to plan, another lab to set up, another parent conference to attend. David would find me at the kitchen table at midnight, surrounded by student essays, barely able to keep my eyes open. "You need to slow down, Sarah," he'd say. But his voice carried the distracted tone of someone who was already thinking about something else. Usually his phone, which seemed permanently attached to his hand these days. "I'm fine," I'd respond, because that's what wives and mothers say. We're fine. We're always fine, even when our bodies are screaming that we're anything but. The collapse happened during third period AP chemistry. I was explaining molecular bonds to a room full of 17-year-olds when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The periodic table on the wall began swimming. The students' faces blurred together like a watercolor painting left in the rain, and then nothing. I woke up in the emergency room with David standing over me, his face creased with what looked like genuine concern. Emma was there too, her eyes red from crying, clutching my hand like she could anchor me to consciousness through sheer will. "The doctors want to run some tests," David said, and something in his tone made me search his face more carefully. But before I could analyze that strange inflection, a nurse appeared with a clipboard of questions and consent forms, and the medical machinery took over. The tests were endless. Blood draws that left my arms looking like a roadmap of purple bruises. MRIs that required me to lie perfectly still in a tube that sounded like a construction site. CT scans that made me drink chalky liquid that tasted like liquid disappointment. Specialists paraded through my room, each one frowning at my chart and ordering yet another test. Through it all, my family was there. David brought me crossword puzzles and gossip from his office. Emma smuggled in my favorite chocolate chip cookies from the bakery. Margaret fussed over my blankets and complained about the hospital food with the righteous indignation only a mother-in-law can muster. Frank sat quietly in the corner chair, occasionally offering dry commentary about whatever baseball game was playing on the room's tiny television. They were there, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way David's eyes never quite met mine when he spoke, or how Emma seemed to be performing her concern rather than feeling it, or the odd timing of Margaret's visits, always when I was drowsy from medication, never when I was alert enough for real conversation. But I was sick, possibly dying according to the increasingly grim faces of my medical team, and sick people are paranoid people. At least, that's what I told myself. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was as devastating as it was mysterious. Systemic organ failure caused by an unknown toxin. My liver was shutting down, my kidneys were struggling, and my neurological system was under attack. The toxicology reports showed elevated levels of several compounds that had no business being in a high school chemistry teacher's bloodstream. It's like nothing we've seen before. Dr. Martinez explained to my family during one of those somber bedside conferences. The combination of substances suggests, well, it's highly unusual for these particular compounds to occur naturally or accidentally. I watched my family's faces during this explanation. David's expression was carefully neutral, the look he wore during difficult parent-teacher conferences. Emma stared at the floor. Margaret clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Only Frank met my eyes, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. Pity, not concern, not fear, but pity. As my condition worsened and I was moved to the ICU, their visits became shorter, more perfunctory. David would check his phone constantly, claiming work emergencies. Emma had important senior year activities she couldn't miss. Margaret and Frank murmured about giving me space to rest. But it was the conversation I overheard that changed everything. I was drifting in and out of consciousness, the kind of twilight state where you're not sure if you're dreaming or awake. The medication made everything feel distant and underwater, but voices in the hallway outside my room cut through the pharmaceutical fog with startling clarity. Doesn't even realize. Easier this way. Trip to Hawaii will do us all good. By the time we get back, insurance money? The fragments didn't make sense individually, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. I forced my eyes open, tried to call out, but my voice was nothing more than a whisper lost in the mechanical symphony of life support machines. They were planning to leave. While I lay dying in the ICU, my family was planning a vacation to Hawaii. The next morning, they made it official. David sat in the chair beside my bed, holding my hand in a way that felt more like a business handshake than an intimate gesture. "The doctors say your condition has stabilized," he said, which wasn't exactly true. My condition had plateaued, but at a level that could charitably be described as not immediately dying. Emma's been so stressed about college applications, and my parents have had this Hawaii trip planned for months. We thought it might be good for everyone to have a break. A break from watching their wife and daughter-in-law die? "How long?" I managed to croak. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "The doctors will take good care of you and we'll be back before you know it." 3 weeks. They were planning to abandon me for 3 weeks while I fought for my life. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand explanations. But the medication and the illness had stripped away my ability to fight. All I could do was nod weakly and watch as my family efficiently packed up their concern and prepared to ship it off to a tropical paradise. Emma stopped by on her way to the airport. She leaned down to kiss my forehead, and for just a moment, I thought I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, so quietly I wasn't sure I heard correctly. "Sorry for what? For leaving? Or for something else entirely?" They left on a Tuesday. I know because Tuesday was always my favorite day of the week, the day when the weekend felt both recent enough to remember and close enough to anticipate. Now Tuesday would forever be the day my family decided I wasn't worth staying for. The days that followed were a blur of medical procedures and medication adjustments. Nurses became my only human contact, their professional kindness a poor substitute for family love, but infinitely better than the alternative silence. I learned their names, their schedules, their small personal details. Maria had 3 kids and was studying for her nurse practitioner degree. James collected vintage postcards and had never been outside of Texas. Susan was planning a wedding and asked my advice about chemistry-themed centerpieces, apparently forgetting that I was too sick to lift my head, let alone plan decorative arrangements. It was Susan who first noticed something strange about my medical chart. "Your blood work from yesterday is interesting," she mentioned casually while checking my IV. "The toxin levels are actually decreasing." Dr. Martinez was surprised. Usually, these compounds take much longer to clear the system. Decreasing. For the first time since this nightmare began,
Something in my body was improving rather than deteriorating. Over the next few days, the improvement accelerated. My appetite returned. The crushing fatigue began to lift. The neurological symptoms that had made simple conversations feel like climbing mountains started to fade. By the end of the first week, I was sitting up in bed. By the end of the second week, I was walking short distances with assistance. It's remarkable, Dr. Martinez admitted during his rounds. We've never seen recovery from this type of poisoning happen so quickly. Usually, if patients survive at all, it's a months-long process. Poisoning. He said it so casually. He was commenting on the weather. But the word hit me like a physical blow. Not exposure to toxins or unknown compounds, poisoning. Are you saying someone did this to me intentionally? I asked. Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable. The combination of substances in your system, it's highly unlikely to occur accidentally. We're required to report cases like this to the authorities. Authorities. Police. Investigation. Someone had tried to kill me. And my family had left me here to die alone? The detective who came to interview me was a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Rodriguez. She had the kind of eyes that had seen too much, and the gentle manner of someone who specialized in talking to victims. I know this is difficult to consider, but we need to look at who had access to your food, your drinks, your personal items in the weeks leading up to your illness. My family, the people who cooked meals, who knew my schedule, who had keys to our house and unlimited access to every aspect of my daily routine. The compounds found in your blood, Detective Rodriguez continued. They're not easily obtained. Someone would need specific knowledge about chemistry, about how these substances interact with the human body. Someone like a chemistry teacher. Or someone who lived with a chemistry teacher and had access to her supplies, her knowledge, her trust. I told Detective Rodriguez about the overheard conversation, about the Hawaii trip, about the strange behavior I'd noticed in the weeks before my collapse. She listened without judgment, taking careful notes, asking gentle but probing questions. We'll need to wait until your family returns to conduct interviews, she said. In the meantime, we're going to have hospital security keep a closer eye on your room. And Mrs. Chen, don't mention this investigation to anyone who calls or visits. Can you do that for me? I could. In fact, it was easy, because nobody called or visited. 3 weeks of silence from Hawaii. No postcards, no phone calls asking about my condition, no text messages with updates about their vacation. Nothing. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment they boarded their plane. But I wasn't just existing, I was thriving. With each day that passed without my family's presence, my strength returned more rapidly. The doctors were amazed. The nurses were delighted. I began to suspect that my recovery wasn't just remarkable, it was revealing. On the day they were scheduled to return, I was sitting up in a chair by the window, reading a book that James had brought me from the hospital's volunteer library. I looked nothing like the dying woman they had left behind. My color was good, my hands were steady, and my mind was clearer than it had been in months. I heard them before I saw them. David's voice in the hallway, talking to someone, probably Dr. Martinez, in tones too low for me to make out individual words. Then Emma's higher pitch, asking a question, Margaret's theatrical gasp, Frank's gravelly response. They appeared in my doorway like actors making an entrance, and the performance was immediately apparent. Shock, joy, relief, all perfectly calibrated for maximum dramatic impact. Sarah! David rushed to my side. My God, you look wonderful. The doctors said you were improving, but we had no idea. They had spoken to my doctors while they were in Hawaii. They had known about my recovery and chosen not to call me, not to cut their vacation short, not to rush back to my bedside. They had known I was getting better and stayed away anyway. I feel much better, I said carefully. The doctors say it's been remarkable. We came back as soon as we could, as soon as our flights. as soon as we could get everything arranged. Margaret was studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. You do look well, dear. Much better than we expected. Expected, not hoped. Expected. Frank remained silent in the corner, the same pitying look in his eyes that I'd noticed weeks ago. But now I understood what he was pitying me for. Not my illness, but my ignorance. They stayed for exactly 1 hour, long enough to establish their presence for any medical staff who might be watching, long enough to ask appropriate questions about my treatment and recovery timeline. Then David glanced at his watch with practiced casualness. Well, we should let you rest. We're pretty jet-lagged from the flight, and we need to get Emma settled before school starts up again. School. Emma was a senior in high school, the school where I taught, the school I would presumably return to once I was fully recovered, the school where my attempted murder would be the subject of faculty lounge whispers and student gossip. When will you be coming home? David asked, and I realized he was hoping the answer would be, not soon. I said, the doctors want to keep me a few more days for observation, but probably by the weekend. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Fear? That's wonderful news. We'll have everything ready for you. After they left, I sat in the gathering twilight of my hospital room and tried to process what had just happened. My family had returned from their vacation, disappointed that I was still alive. They had hoped to come back to a funeral instead of a recovery. But I was missing something crucial. The why. What could possibly motivate a husband, daughter, and in-laws to poison their wife, mother, and daughter-in-law? What was worth killing for? The answer came the next morning, delivered by Detective Rodriguez along with a cup of truly terrible hospital coffee.
We executed search warrants on your home and your husband's office yesterday, she said. What we found is illuminating. She opened a folder and spread several documents across my bedside table. Insurance policies, financial statements, legal documents I had never seen before. Your husband took out a substantial life insurance policy on you 6 months ago, Detective Rodriguez explained. $2 million. He told the insurance company it was because of your job, potential exposure to dangerous chemicals in the school lab. $2 million. Enough to pay off the mortgage, fund Emma's college education, and leave plenty for a comfortable life. Enough to make murder seem like a reasonable business decision. There's more, the detective continued. Your husband has been having an affair with his office manager, Linda Patel, for over a year. They've been looking at houses together, making plans. According to her phone records, they were in contact throughout your illness and during the Hawaii trip. An affair, of course. The oldest motive in the book, dressed up in the modern economics of life insurance and family finances. And your daughter? Detective Rodriguez's expression softened. Emma's college applications require significant financial support. Full tuition, room and board, plus expenses. We're talking about $300,000 over 4 years. Your family's current financial situation couldn't support that without major lifestyle changes or substantial debt. My brilliant daughter, my honor student, my pride and joy. She had chosen my death over student loans. What about David's parents? They're listed as secondary beneficiaries on the insurance policy. If something happened to both you and David, they'd inherit a substantial amount. Plus, Frank has some significant gambling debts that your husband has been helping to cover. Your death would solve multiple financial problems for the entire family. I stared at the documents spread across my bedside table. My life reduced to actuarial tables and financial calculations. My love converted into dollar signs. The compounds found in your blood, we traced them to 2 sources. Several came from your school's chemistry lab, substances that someone with access to the building could have obtained. But the others are more interesting. They're industrial cleaning compounds, the kind used in commercial office buildings. David's office building, where he worked, where Linda worked, where he had access to industrial-grade chemicals that could slowly poison his wife while creating a perfect cover story about accidental exposure. We think they were administering small doses over several weeks, probably in your coffee, which your husband prepared for you every morning, or in your evening tea, which your daughter often made. The goal was to make it look like a gradual illness, something that could be attributed to occupational hazards. My morning coffee, my evening tea. The small rituals of domestic life perverted into instruments of murder. How did they know about the chemical combinations? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Your husband has been doing research. We found websites, articles, forum discussions about various compounds and their effects on human physiology. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Months. While I was grading papers and planning lessons, my husband was researching ways to kill me. While I was helping Emma with college applications, she was calculating whether my life was worth less than her tuition. While I was sharing family dinners with Margaret and Frank, they were mentally spending my life insurance money. We'll be making arrests as soon as you're discharged from the hospital. We want you somewhere safe when that happens. Do you have family or friends you can stay with? Family, friends. I realized with stunning clarity that my entire social world had revolved around the people who had tried to kill me. My colleagues at school were friendly but not close. My college friends had drifted away over the years. My own parents had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. David's family had been my family, and David's friends had been my friends. I was utterly alone. I'll figure something out, I said, but Detective Rodriguez looked skeptical. There are resources available, she said gently. Victim support services, temporary housing assistance. You don't have to navigate this by yourself, but I wanted to navigate it by myself. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, I wanted to make decisions based solely on what I needed, what I wanted, what would make me happy. I wanted to be selfish in the way that people who have nearly died are entitled to be selfish. I was discharged on Friday afternoon. David came to pick me up, playing the role of concerned husband with Oscar-worthy dedication. He helped me into the car, adjusted my seatbelt, asked if I was comfortable. "It's so good to have you coming home," he said as we pulled out of the hospital parking lot. Home. The word felt strange now. How do you return to a place where someone tried to kill you? How do you sit at a kitchen table where your morning coffee was laced with poison? How do you sleep in a bed next to someone who researched the most effective ways to end your life? The house looked exactly the same, but everything felt different. Emma was at school, David explained, but she would be home later. Margaret had prepared a casserole that was waiting in the refrigerator. Frank had fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom that had been bothering me for months. Such thoughtful gestures from my loving family. I spent that weekend observing my life from the outside, like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. I watched David make my coffee on Saturday morning, noting how he turned his back while adding the cream, how he stirred it longer than necessary, how he placed it in front of me with just a hint of expectation in his eyes. I didn't drink it. "Not feeling like coffee today?" he asked. "My stomach is still a bit sensitive. The doctors warned that some foods might not agree with me for a while." His disappointment was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Emma came home Saturday afternoon with her usual teenage energy, but I noticed how she avoided physical contact with me. No hugs, no casual touches, no curling up beside me on the couch like she had when she was younger. She kept her distance, as if proximity to me made her uncomfortable. That evening, she offered to make my usual cup of chamomile tea. "That's so sweet of you," I said, "but I think I'm going to skip tea for a few days, still not feeling quite right." Another flicker of something, frustration, concern, across her face. Margaret and Frank came for Sunday dinner, as they had every Sunday for 15 years. Margaret fussed over me, insisting that I needed to eat more, regain my strength. She kept pushing food on me, specific dishes that she had prepared. "I made your favorite green bean casserole," she said, spooning a large portion onto my plate. My favorite green bean casserole, except it wasn't my favorite, and never had been. It was David's favorite, and Margaret had always assumed I shared his tastes. But now I wondered if there was another reason she was so insistent I eat it.
I'm still on a pretty restricted diet, I said. The doctors want me to stick to very simple foods for now.
Frank watched this exchange with those pitying eyes, and I realized he knew. Of course he knew. He was in on it. But he was also the weak link, the one who felt guilty, the one who might break under pressure. Sunday night, after David had gone to sleep, I packed a small bag and left my marriage. I didn't leave a note. I didn't take anything except some clothes, important documents, and the small emergency cash fund I had always kept hidden in an old textbook in my home office. I drove to a motel on the other side of town, checked in under my maiden name, and called Detective Rodriguez. "I think they know that I know," I said. "I can't stay there anymore." "We can move up the timeline," she said. "We were planning to make arrests on Tuesday, but if you feel unsafe—" "Tuesday is fine," I said. "I just needed to get out of there." "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Did I need anything? I needed a new life. I needed a family that didn't see me as a financial obstacle. I needed to understand how 20 years of marriage could end in a research project about poison. "I'm okay," I said, because it was almost true. The arrests happened like something out of a movie. I watched from Detective Rodriguez's car as police officers approached my house on Tuesday morning. David was leaving for work, coffee mug in hand, briefcase over his shoulder. He looked so normal, so ordinary, so incapable of murder, till the handcuffs went on. Then something in his face changed, and for just a moment, I saw the man who had spent months researching ways to kill his wife. Cold, calculating, devoid of the warmth I had fallen in love with 20 years earlier. Emma was next. They arrested her at school, which meant her classmates and teachers witnessed the police escort. The girl who had been accepted to 3 Ivy League schools, who had won state science fair competitions, who had been my greatest pride and joy, led away in handcuffs for attempted murder. Margaret and Frank were taken from their home, Frank's gambling debts and Margaret's financial desperation finally coming due. The local news covered the story with the breathless excitement that comes with a crime involving educated, middle-class people who aren't supposed to be capable of attempted murder. "Chemistry teacher poisoned by family," the headlines read. "Family plot to kill teacher for insurance money foiled." I didn't watch the news coverage, but I heard about it. The whole town was talking about it. My colleagues at school called and texted, expressing shock and support in equal measure. Former students reached out on social media, sharing memories of my classes and expressing disbelief that someone had tried to hurt their favorite teacher. The trial, when it finally happened, 8 months later, was a media circus. David's lawyer argued that the poisoning was accidental, the result of my occupational exposure to dangerous chemicals. Emma's lawyer painted her as a manipulated child who had been coerced by her father. Margaret and Frank's lawyers claimed they had no knowledge of the plot and were merely innocent beneficiaries of an insurance policy they didn't know existed. But the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records showing coordination between all 4 defendants, financial documents revealing motive, search histories on multiple devices showing research on poison, symptoms, and dosages. Most damning of all, the forensic analysis of my coffee mug and teacup, which contained residue of the same compounds found in my bloodstream. David got 25 years. Emma, tried as an adult despite her age, got 15 years, with the possibility of parole after 10. Margaret got 12 years. Frank, who cooperated with prosecutors and provided detailed testimony about the family's financial motivations, got 8 years. I testified on the final day of the trial. The prosecutor asked me to describe the physical and emotional impact of the poisoning, and I found myself looking directly at my family, my former family, as I spoke. The worst part wasn't the physical pain. It wasn't the fear of dying or the uncertainty about what was happening to my body. The worst part was lying in that hospital bed, fighting for my life, and realizing that the people I loved most in the world had chosen money over my existence.
That my daughter had calculated the cost of her college education against the value of her mother's life and decided I wasn't worth it. That my husband of 20 years had researched the most efficient ways to kill me while still kissing me goodnight. That my in-laws had mentally spent my life insurance money while sitting at my bedside pretending to grieve. Emma was crying by the time I finished. David stared at the table in front of him. Margaret gripped Frank's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Frank met my eyes one last time, and I saw something that might have been remorse. But it was too late for remorse. The verdict was guilty on all counts for all defendants. As they were led away, Emma looked back at me one last time, and I saw my little girl, the child who used to curl up in my lap for bedtime stories, who brought me flowers picked from the neighbor's garden, who once told me I was the smartest person in the whole world. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a profound sadness for what we had all lost. After the trial, I had to rebuild my life from scratch. The house was sold to pay legal fees. I moved to a different state, got a job teaching at a community college, and slowly began the process of figuring out who Sarah Chen was when she wasn't someone's wife, mother, or daughter-in-law. The answer, it turned out, was someone I quite liked. I traveled for the first time in decades, taking summer trips to places David had never wanted to visit. I learned to cook for one person and discovered I actually preferred smaller portions of better food. I made new friends, people who knew me only as the woman I was now, not the woman I had been before my family tried to kill me. I dated occasionally, but casually. The idea of trusting someone enough to share a household, to let them make my coffee in the morning, to give them access to my daily routines, that might take longer to recover from than the physical effects of the poisoning. But I was healing. My body had recovered completely within 6 months of leaving the hospital. My spirit was taking longer, but progress was evident in small ways. I laughed more easily. I slept better. I made decisions based on my own preferences instead of trying to anticipate what others wanted. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Emma. It was forwarded through my lawyer, as per the restraining order I had obtained against all 4 of them. "Mom," it began, and I almost stopped reading right there. But curiosity won. "I know I don't have the right to call you that anymore, but I don't know how else to address you. I want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about what I did. I was 18 years old and thought I understood the world, thought I knew what mattered. I was wrong about everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away. Not just your life, but your love, your wisdom, your presence in the world. I was so focused on my future that I tried to destroy the person who had made that future possible. I'm getting my GED in prison. I'm taking college courses through a correspondence program. I'm trying to become someone who would make you proud, even though I know I'll never have the chance to show you. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. I hope you found people who deserve your love and who know how to cherish it. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I read the letter 3 times, then put it away in a box with other documents from that period of my life. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't respond either. Some wounds heal, but they still leave scars. Some betrayals can be understood, even forgiven on an intellectual level, but they can never be forgotten. 3 years after the poisoning, I was offered a position as head of the chemistry department at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. It was a beautiful campus, surrounded by mountains that turned brilliant colors in the fall. My students were engaged and curious. My colleagues were supportive and professional. I bought a small house with a garden where I grew vegetables and herbs. I learned to identify birds and started keeping a journal of the species I spotted in my backyard. I volunteered at the local animal shelter and eventually adopted a dog, a gentle golden retriever mix named Samwise, who had been surrendered by a family who didn't have time for him anymore. Sam became my first lesson in loving something that depended on me without fearing betrayal. Dogs don't calculate the cost-benefit ratio of loyalty. They don't research ways to poison their owners for insurance money. They just love, completely and without reservation, and they trust that love will be returned. On the 5th anniversary of my poisoning, I received another letter. This one was from Frank. "Sarah," he wrote, "I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us, and I understand why. But I'm getting out next month, and before I do, I wanted you to know some things. I was the one who suggested the Hawaii trip. I knew what David and Emma were doing. I didn't help with the actual poisoning, but I knew about it and I didn't stop it. I thought if we were all gone when you died, it would be easier somehow, less suspicious. I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about everything. Margaret didn't know that. I need you to understand that. She thought you were genuinely ill, and she was scared. The insurance policy beneficiary thing was David's idea. He added us without telling Margaret. She found out during the investigation, and it nearly broke her. She's been asking me to write to you for years, wanting to apologize, but she doesn't think she has the right. She loved you, Sarah, really loved you. You were the daughter she never had, and finding out that David had manipulated the situation to make her look complicit, it's been harder on her than the prison time. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that not everything was a lie. Margaret's love for you was real, even if everything else was poisoned. This letter I did respond to, but only briefly. Frank, thank you for clarifying Margaret's role. I'm glad to know she wasn't part of the plan. However, I'm not ready for any contact with anyone from that part of my life. Perhaps someday, but not now. I hope you're able to build a better life when you're released. Sarah. I never heard from any of them again. Years passed, my hair went gray, and I decided I liked it that way. No more monthly trips to cover the silver, no more worry about whether I looked old. I earned tenure at the college. I published papers on chemistry education. I won teaching awards. I traveled to conferences and gave presentations about innovative lab techniques. I was invited to lecture at other schools, and one day found myself standing in front of a group of high school students, not unlike the ones I had taught before my poisoning. A student raised her hand and asked a question that stopped me cold. "Professor Chen, do you ever worry about dangerous chemical exposures in your work?" The question was innocent, just a teenager's curiosity about occupational hazards. But for a moment, I was back in that ICU room, listening to my family plan their Hawaiian vacation while I fought for my life. Chemical safety is always important, but the real danger is usually not from accidental exposure. It's from people who would use chemistry to harm others intentionally. After the lecture, the teacher who had invited me asked if I was okay. "You seemed a bit shaken by that student's question," she said. "Just remembering something from my past," I replied. "Nothing to worry about." But walking to my car afterward, I realized something profound had happened in that moment. For the first time since my poisoning, someone had asked about chemical dangers, and I had answered without fear, without trauma, without the weight of betrayal crushing my chest. The experience had been incorporated into my identity without destroying it. I was no longer the woman who had been poisoned by her family. I was a woman who had survived poisoning by her family and had built a life worth living on the other side of that survival. That night, I called my lawyer. "I want to dissolve the restraining order," I said. "Are you sure?" "Once it's dissolved, they can contact you directly if they choose to." "I'm sure. If they reach out, I'll decide then whether I want to respond. But I don't want to be afraid anymore." The restraining order was dissolved on a Tuesday, my favorite day of the week, reclaimed from the anniversary of abandonment and transformed into a day of liberation. I never heard from David. I learned through internet searches that he had been a model prisoner, earning his GED and working in the prison library. He would be eligible for parole in 15 more years when he would be in his 60s. I felt nothing when I looked at his photograph in a news article about prison rehabilitation programs. Not love, not hate, not anger, nothing. He had become a stranger who had once shared my life. Emma wrote to me one more time, 6 years after her first letter. She was being released on parole, having served 10 years of her 15-year sentence. She had earned 2 college degrees while incarcerated and was planning to work with at-risk youth.
I don't expect to hear back from you, she wrote. I just wanted you to know that I've spent every day of the last 10 years trying to understand how I became someone capable of what I did. I've worked with therapists, taken classes on ethics and moral philosophy, volunteered with programs for victims of violent crime. I'm not trying to earn forgiveness. I know that's not something I can earn. I'm trying to earn the right to exist in the world without causing more harm. I learned something in here that I wish I had understood when I was 18. Love isn't something you can calculate or optimize. It's not a transaction where you weigh costs and benefits. Real love means choosing someone's well-being over your own convenience, their life over your comfort, their happiness over your advantage. I thought I loved you, but I didn't understand what love meant. You taught me chemistry, but the most important lesson you ever taught me was about the elements that make up a human life. Courage, integrity, compassion, sacrifice. I failed that lesson spectacularly, but I've been studying it ever since. I hope you're well. I hope you're surrounded by people who know how to love you properly. I hope you never have to think about me or what I did to you ever again. This letter I kept on my kitchen table for 3 weeks, reading it with my morning coffee. Coffee I made myself, in my own kitchen, without fear. Eventually, I wrote back. Emma, I began, and realized it was the first time I had written her name in 10 years. I received your letter. I'm proud of the work you've done on yourself, though I'm sure it's been difficult. I hope you're able to help those young people you'll be working with. I want you to know that I don't carry anger toward you anymore. Understanding what you did, forgiving it, and trusting you again are 3 different things, and I've managed the first 2. The third may never happen, and I need you to be okay with that. You were my daughter for 18 years, and those years contained real love, real joy, real connection. What happened afterward doesn't erase that, but it does mean we can't go back to what we were. I hope you build a good life. I hope you find people who can love you and trust you and be loved and trusted by you in return. I hope you never have to choose between love and advantage again, and I hope if you do, you choose better. Take care of yourself, Sarah. I sent the letter and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't even realized I was holding. Margaret reached out 6 months later, after Frank's letter had apparently been forwarded to her. She was out of prison, living in a small apartment, working at a grocery store. She was 71 years old and afraid she would die before she could properly apologize. She wrote, I loved you like a daughter. I know that doesn't matter now, but I need you to know it was real. When I thought you were dying, I was heartbroken. When I found out what David had done, what he had planned to do, I felt like I was losing you all over again. But this time, it was my own fault for not seeing what was happening in my own family. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you know the love was real, even though everything else was poisoned. I did forgive Margaret, completely and immediately. She had been a victim too, manipulated and used by her son to provide cover for his crimes. I called her, and we talked for 2 hours, crying together over what we had lost and what could never be recovered. I dream about Sunday dinners, the way we used to sit around your table, talking about Emma's school projects and Frank's baseball games and your students' latest experiments. I dream about it, and then I wake up and remember that it's gone forever. It's not entirely gone. Those years happened. That love existed. What happened afterward was terrible, but it does unmake what came before. Margaret and I exchanged letters for several years before she passed away. She died peacefully in her sleep at 75, and her neighbor found my address in her personal effects.
I attended her funeral, sitting in the back, watching Frank cry over the casket of the woman who had stood by him despite his gambling, despite his weakness, despite his cowardice. He saw me afterward, in the parking lot. He said, "Thank you for coming. She talked about you all the time. She never stopped loving you. I never stopped loving her either," I said, and realized it was true. The years continued to pass. I retired from teaching at 65, though I continued to volunteer with literacy programs and occasionally substitute taught for colleagues who needed coverage. I wrote a book about chemical safety in educational settings that became a standard text in teacher preparation programs. I never mentioned my personal experience with chemical poisoning in the book, but colleagues who knew my story said they could feel the weight of lived experience in every safety protocol I recommended. Sam, the golden retriever, lived to be 14, and when he died, I mourned him like the family member he had become. I adopted another dog, a nervous rescue named Piper, who had been abused by her previous owners and took 2 years to learn to trust human hands. Teaching her to accept love became a metaphor for my own healing. Patience, consistency, and the willingness to let trust develop at its own pace.
On my 70th birthday, I threw myself a party. 23 people came, colleagues, neighbors, friends from my book club, volunteers from the animal shelter, students I had mentored over the years. We ate cake in my garden while Piper showed off her newest tricks, and my friends shared stories about the ways I had influenced their lives. Looking around at the gathering, I realized something profound. I had built a family after all, not through blood or marriage, but through the daily choice to show up for people and let them show up for me. Through shared interests and mutual support, and the kind of love that doesn't calculate cost-benefit ratios. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea. Tea I had made myself in my own kitchen with herbs I had grown in my own garden. Piper dozed at my feet, and fireflies blinked in the growing darkness. I thought about the woman I had been 20 years earlier, lying in that ICU bed, betrayed and abandoned and fighting for her life. I thought about the journey from that hospital room to this front porch, from that woman who had built her identity around being a wife and mother to this woman who had learned to be complete on her own. The poisoning had nearly killed me, but in some ways, it had also saved me. It had forced me to discover who I was when everything I thought I knew about love and family and trust was stripped away. It had taught me the difference between being alone and being lonely, between being needed and being loved, between being safe and being free. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I took a selfie. Just me on my front porch, in my own house, surrounded by my own life. I looked at the photo and saw a woman I was proud to be, someone who had survived betrayal and chosen to remain capable of love, someone who had been nearly destroyed and had rebuilt herself stronger. I posted the photo on social media with a simple caption: 70 years old today, grateful for every breath, every choice, every chance to begin again. Among the birthday wishes and heart emojis that followed, there was one comment that made me pause. It was from a young woman named Jennifer, whose profile picture showed her in a graduation cap and gown. "Professor Chen, you probably don't remember me, but I was in your chemistry class 10 years ago when I was struggling with everything. You told me once that chemical reactions can be reversible. Sometimes you can take a compound that seems permanently changed and restore it to its original state, or even transform it into something better. I think about that all the time. Thank you for teaching me about chemistry and about life." I did remember Jennifer, though she had been Janet back then. I remembered a shy teenager who struggled with the mathematical aspects of chemistry, but had an intuitive understanding of molecular behavior that couldn't be taught. I remembered staying after class to help her with problem sets. And yes, I remembered the conversation about reversible reactions. I had been talking about chemistry, but she heard life advice. She had taken a metaphor about molecular transformation and applied it to her own journey of becoming. I wrote back to her, "I remember you well, Jennifer. I'm so proud of who you've become. And you're right, the most beautiful thing about chemistry is that change is always possible."
Even when reactions seem irreversible, new possibilities are always forming. That night, I dreamed about my old classroom for the first time in years. But instead of the nightmarish version that had haunted my sleep for so long, the one where I collapsed in front of my students while my family watched indifferently, I dreamed about the real classroom, full of curious teenagers asking questions about the world and learning to see the magic in everyday transformations. In the dream, I was writing on the whiteboard, explaining how carbon could become diamond under pressure, how coal could transform into something brilliant and nearly indestructible. Behind me, my students were taking notes, but they weren't just learning about chemistry. They were learning about resilience, about the possibility of transformation, about the way pressure and time could create something beautiful from something broken. I woke up smiling. The final chapter of this story isn't about my family or their crimes or even my recovery. It's about the woman I became after I stopped defining myself in relation to other people. It's about the discovery that love, real love, isn't something that can be taken from you because it's not something you receive. It's something you give. For 20 years, I had thought love meant being needed. I had built my identity around being indispensable to my husband, my daughter, my in-laws. I had confused being useful with being valued, being convenient with being cherished. Now I understood that love is a choice you make every day, independent of whether that choice is reciprocated or appreciated or even acknowledged. Love is the decision to want good things for someone, to celebrate their successes, to offer comfort in their failures, to see them as worthy of happiness simply because they exist. I loved my students not because they needed me to teach them chemistry, but because they were young people trying to understand the world. I loved my friends not because they filled empty spaces in my life, but because they were interesting people doing worthwhile things. I loved my dogs not because they protected my house or provided companionship, but because they were creatures capable of joy and deserving of kindness. And yes, in some complicated way, I still loved the people who had tried to kill me. Not the people they had been in those final months, calculating my death for financial gain, but the people they had been before greed and desperation and moral cowardice had poisoned their capacity for genuine care. I loved the memories of who they had been while acknowledging the reality of who they had chosen to become. This distinction between loving someone and trusting them, between forgiving someone and being safe with them, between understanding their actions and excusing them, had taken me years to learn. But learning it had them essential to my healing. On my 71st birthday, I received an unexpected package. There was no return address, but inside was a small clay pot with a beautiful succulent plant and a note written in handwriting I recognized but hadn't seen in more than a decade. "Happy birthday, Mom. I hope you're still growing beautiful things. E." I put the plant on my kitchen windowsill, next to the herbs I use for cooking and the flowers I picked from my garden. It was a lovely gesture, and I appreciated the thought behind it. But I didn't write back, and I didn't need to. The plant wasn't a request for contact or a bid for forgiveness. It was simply a gift, offered without expectation from someone who had learned that love sometimes means staying away. The succulent thrived in my kitchen window, adding its quiet beauty to the collection of living things I tended. I named it Hope, not because I hoped for reconciliation with Emma, but because I hoped she had learned to love properly, without calculation, without condition. That seemed like enough. 22 years after the poisoning, I am 73 years old. I have arthritis in my hands that makes grading papers more difficult, but I still volunteer at the literacy center twice a week. I have a small garden that produces more vegetables than one person can eat, so I share them with neighbors and the local food bank. I have a 13-year-old dog named Charlie who insists on sleeping on my bed, despite being too big for the space we share. I have a life that is entirely my own, built from choices I made for reasons that matter to me. It's not the life I expected when I was 30, 40, or 50 years old. It's better. Sometimes when I'm working in my garden, or reading in my favorite chair, or cooking dinner for one with music playing in the kitchen, I catch myself thinking, this is what happiness actually feels like. Not the desperate gratitude of someone who has narrowly escaped death, not the defensive satisfaction of someone who has survived betrayal, but the quiet contentment of someone who has learned to be at home in her own life. The poison didn't kill me. The betrayal didn't break me. The isolation didn't destroy me. Instead, all of those things taught me something I had never learned in 50 years of being a good wife, devoted mother, and beloved in-law. I was enough all by myself to build a life worth living. That knowledge, hard-won and dearly bought, has been the most valuable compound I have ever isolated from the chaos of human experience. It can't be stolen, can't be diluted, can't be poisoned by someone else's bad intentions. It belongs to me, and it always will. And that, I think, is the real twist ending to this story. Not that my family tried to kill me for money. Greed and betrayal are as old as humanity itself. The twist is that their attempt to destroy me actually taught me how to save myself. The woman they tried to murder no longer exists. In her place is someone stronger, wiser, more genuinely loving, and infinitely freer.
I call that a successful transformation. But the story doesn't end there. Because life never really ends with neat conclusions and satisfied resolutions. There are always new chapters, unexpected developments, moments that force you to reconsider everything you thought you had learned. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late spring, 3 days after my 74th birthday. I was in my garden, transplanting tomato seedlings, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer it anyway. "Is this Sarah Chen?" The voice was young, female, nervous. "Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm Emma's daughter, your granddaughter." The world went still. The phone nearly slipped from my dirt-covered hands. Granddaughter. Emma had a daughter. "I know this is probably a shock," Rachel continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I know about what happened with Mom and your family. She told me everything when I turned 18 last month. But I've been thinking about you my whole life, wondering about you, and I finally worked up the courage to call." I sat down heavily on my garden bench, trying to process this information. Emma had been released from prison 8 years ago. She would have been 28 then. Time enough to meet someone, fall in love, start a family. Time enough to build a life that included a daughter who was now 18 years old. "How did you get my number?" I asked, because it was easier than processing the emotional weight of having a granddaughter I had never known existed. "She still has your address from when you wrote to her years ago. I hired one of those people finder services online. It wasn't hard. You're not exactly hiding." No, I wasn't hiding. I had built a life in the open, under my own name, without fear or shame. But I had never considered that Emma might have built a life too, one that included another generation. What do you want from me?" I asked gently. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "I just wanted to hear your voice. I wanted to know if you're real, if you're okay. Mom talks about you sometimes, and she always gets this look on her face, like she's remembering something beautiful and terrible at the same time. Tell me about yourself," I said, because I needed time to think, and because despite everything, I was curious about this young woman who carried half of Emma's DNA and none of her history. "I'm 18. I just graduated from high school. I'm starting college in the fall, pre-med actually. I want to be a pediatric oncologist." She paused. "Mom says I get my interest in science from you. From me. A granddaughter who wanted to heal children with cancer, who had inherited scientific curiosity from a grandmother she had never met. What else did your mother tell you about me?" "She said you were the best teacher she ever had, even before she was her mom. She said you taught her to ask questions about everything, to never accept easy answers. She said you made her believe she was smart enough to understand anything if she worked hard enough." I closed my eyes. That was the Emma I remembered, the curious little girl who used to help me set up chemistry demonstrations, who asked endless questions about why things worked the way they did, who wanted to understand the fundamental rules that governed the universe. She also said she destroyed the most important relationship in her life because she was young and stupid and thought she could calculate love like a math problem. The words hung in the air between us,
carried by cellular towers and satellites across whatever distance separated my garden from wherever Rachel was calling from. She said that? She says it a lot. She's never stopped regretting what she did. She says losing you was worse than going to prison, because prison ended, but losing you will last forever. I felt tears starting, the kind that come without warning and can't be stopped. All these years, I had wondered if Emma truly understood what she had thrown away. Apparently, she did. Rachel, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. What your mother did, it wasn't just a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. She participated in a plan to murder me, to slowly poison me to death for money. That's not something that can be undone or forgiven lightly. I know, Rachel said quietly. She told me everything, every detail. She said she needed me to understand exactly what she was capable of so I could decide for myself whether I wanted her in my life. And what did you decide? I decided that people can change. I decided that the woman who raised me, who worked 3 jobs to put herself through school, who volunteers at a domestic violence shelter, and donates half her income to victim support organizations, that woman isn't the same person who tried to kill her mother 23 years ago. 23 years. Had it really been that long? Mom doesn't know I'm calling you. She would never ask me to do this. She's spent my whole life telling me that some things can't be fixed and some people deserve to be left alone. Then why are you calling? Because I'm 18 years old and about to start my own life, and I wanted to know if I have a grandmother. Not to fix anything or change anything, but just to know. I wanted to hear your voice and know that you're out there in the world, living a good life. A grandmother. I had never thought of myself that way. The title belonged to women who knitted blankets and baked cookies and remembered birthdays. Women whose children brought grandchildren for visits and holiday dinners. Women who had earned the right to that relationship through decades of consistent love and presence. But here was a young woman claiming that title for me anyway, based on nothing more than genetics and curiosity and 18 years of wondering. What's your father like? He's a good man, a high school principal who coaches debate team and grows orchids as a hobby. He knows about Emma's past. She told him before they got married. He says everyone deserves a chance to prove they've changed. High school principal, someone who worked with teenagers every day, who understood the difference between adolescent poor judgment and adult criminal behavior, someone who had chosen to love Emma despite knowing exactly what she had done. Does he know I'm calling you? He suggested it, actually. He said family connections are important, even complicated ones. He said you might want to know that Emma turned out okay, that she raised a daughter who wants to help sick children instead of hurting people.
We talked for another hour. Rachel told me about her childhood, her school activities, her college plans. She was articulate and thoughtful, with Emma's quick intelligence, but without the calculating coldness that had made Emma capable of attempted murder. She spoke about her mother with obvious love, but also with clear-eyed understanding of Emma's failures.
Mom works with teenage girls who've been in trouble with the law, Rachel explained. She helps them get their GEDs, apply for college, find jobs. She says it's her way of trying to balance the scales for what she did. And what do you think about that? I think you can't balance scales like that. You can't undo murder by helping other people, but you can choose to spend your life trying to add more good to the world than you took away. Wise words from an 18-year-old. Words that suggested Emma had raised her daughter to understand nuance, to think critically about justice and redemption, and the possibility of meaningful change. After we hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen as the sun moved across the sky. Charlie found me there and settled at my feet, sensing my emotional state with the intuition that dogs possess. A granddaughter. The daughter Emma had raised while serving her sentence and building a new life afterward. A young woman who wanted to heal children, who had been taught to think carefully about right and wrong, who had been given enough information to make her own decisions about forgiveness and family loyalty. I thought about the letter Emma had sent years ago, about becoming someone who would make me proud.
Perhaps she had succeeded in ways I hadn't imagined. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I searched for Emma online. It didn't take long to find her. She worked for a nonprofit organization that provided educational and career support for formerly incarcerated women. Her staff photo showed a woman in her 40s with graying hair and serious eyes, wearing a simple blouse and a cautious smile. She looked older than her years, but not broken. She looked like someone who had faced difficult truths about herself and chosen to keep moving forward anyway. I found articles about the organization's work, including one that quoted Emma extensively about the challenges of reintegrating into society after incarceration. She spoke about the importance of accountability, about the difference between remorse and self-pity, about the obligation to use your experience to help other people avoid similar mistakes. I made choices that destroyed my family and nearly killed someone I loved. She was quoted as saying, "I can't undo those choices, but I can choose every day to be someone different. I can choose to help other people make better decisions than I did." There was no self-pity in her words, no attempt to minimize her actions or blame her youth, just stark acknowledgement of what she had done and determination to spend her life differently. I closed my laptop and sat with this new information, trying to decide what it meant for me. The next morning, I called Rachel back. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I'd like to know more about your mother's work. Could you send me some information about her organization?" "Of course, but can I ask why?" "Because I want to understand who she became, not to forgive her or to rebuild a relationship, but because you're right, it matters that she turned out okay. It matters that she's spending her life trying to help other people." Rachel sent me links to articles, annual reports, testimonials from women the organization had helped. I spent the afternoon reading about Emma's work, about the programs she had developed, about the young women who credited her with helping them turn their lives around. One testimonial particularly caught my attention. It was from a 19-year-old named Destiny, who had been arrested for armed robbery at 17. "Emma never lets me make excuses," Destiny wrote. "She says your past explains your choices, but it doesn't excuse them. She says the only way to prove you've changed is to spend every day choosing differently. She's the first adult who believed I could be better than my worst moment, and she's also the first one who wouldn't let me use my trauma as a reason to keep hurting people." That sounded like the kind of tough love I remembered giving my students, the combination of high expectations and unwavering support that helped young people believe in their own capacity for growth. A week after Rachel's first call, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wrote a letter to Emma. "Emma," I began, not sure how to address the woman who had been my daughter, my attempted murderer, and now the mother of my granddaughter. "Rachel called me last week. I hope you don't mind. She was curious about me, and I was curious about her. She's a remarkable young woman, and you should be proud of the job you've done raising her. I've been reading about your work with formerly incarcerated women. The programs you've developed sound innovative and effective. I'm particularly impressed by your emphasis on accountability rather than victimhood. It suggests you've learned important things about the difference between explanation and excuse. I want you to know that I don't hate you. I haven't hated you for years. What you did was unforgivable in the legal and practical sense. There are consequences that can't be undone, trust that can't be rebuilt, relationships that can't be restored. But hate is a poison I chose not to carry. I also want you to know that I'm proud of who you've become. Not in the way a mother is proud of a daughter. We can't go back to that relationship. But proud in the way one person can be proud of another person's commitment to growth and service. Rachel doesn't need to choose between us. You're her mother, and from what I can see, you've been a good one. I'm her grandmother, and I'd like to know her better if she's interested in that. This doesn't change anything between us. I'm not offering forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm simply acknowledging that you've spent 23 years becoming someone different than the person who tried to kill me. And that matters. Take care of yourself and keep doing the good work you're doing. Sarah. I mailed the letter before I could change my mind. Emma's response came 2 weeks later. Sarah, she wrote, thank you for your letter. I cried when I read it. Not sad tears, but grateful ones. I never expected you to be proud of anything I did, and knowing that you see value in my work means more than I can express. You're right that we can't go back to being mother and daughter. I destroyed that possibility when I chose money over your life. But knowing that you don't hate me, that you can acknowledge my growth without requiring me to forget my failures, that feels like a kind of grace I don't deserve, but am grateful to receive. Rachel is the best thing I've ever done. She's smart and kind and has a moral compass I never possessed at her age. If you want to know her, to be part of her life in whatever way feels right to you, that would make me happy. She deserves to have as many people loving her as possible.
I think about you often. I hope you know that what I did to you taught me everything I needed to know about the difference between loving someone and using them. I've tried to live that lesson every day since. Thank you for giving Rachel the gift of knowing her grandmother exists and is well. Thank you for reading about my work and seeing it as meaningful. Thank you for being the kind of person who can separate understanding from endorsement, growth from forgiveness. I hope your life continues to be full of joy and purpose. Emma. And so began the strangest chapter of my story. A careful, limited relationship with the granddaughter I had never known existed, and a cautious correspondence with the daughter who had tried to kill me. Rachel and I began talking regularly. She visited me twice during her freshman year of college, driving up from her school 4 hours away. She was everything Emma had claimed: intelligent, compassionate, driven to help others. She had Emma's analytical mind, but none of her capacity for rationalization. When faced with ethical dilemmas, Rachel chose the harder right over the easier wrong with an instinct that seemed to come naturally. Mom says you taught me to think scientifically about everything. She says that's what made her so dangerous when she was young. She could analyze a problem and find the most efficient solution without considering whether the solution was moral. And how did she teach you to think differently? She taught me that some questions are more important than, how can I solve this problem? She taught me to ask, how can I solve this problem without hurting anyone? And how can I solve this problem in a way that makes the world better? Those were good questions. Questions that might have saved us all a lot of pain if Emma had learned to ask them 25 years earlier. During Rachel's second visit, she brought photo albums. Pictures of Emma's life since her release from prison. Graduation photos from her college programs, pictures from her wedding to the principal who grew orchids, photos of Rachel as a baby, a toddler, a school-aged child. Looking at those pictures, I saw a different Emma than the one I remembered. This Emma looked tired but not defeated, older but not bitter. She looked like someone who had accepted the weight of her choices and found a way to carry that weight productively. She never talks about the time before, Rachel said, turning pages carefully. I mean, she told me what happened when I was old enough to understand, but she doesn't dwell on it or use it as an excuse for anything. She just says that was who she used to be, and now she's someone different. That seemed healthy. The past acknowledged, but not dwelt upon. Lessons learned and applied, but not endlessly rehearsed. Do you ever think about reaching out to her directly? Not to be family again, but just to, I don't know, to see each other as the people you are now instead of the people you were then? I considered this question for a long time. I don't think so, I said finally. Some distances are meant to be maintained. But I'm glad you exist, and I'm glad she raised you well, and I'm glad we can all acknowledge each other's humanity without requiring more than that. Rachel nodded, seeming to understand that some forms of healing don't involve reconciliation.
Emma and I continued to exchange letters occasionally, always brief, always focused on Rachel or on general updates about our lives. She sent me newspaper clippings about her organization's successes. I sent her photos of my garden and updates about my volunteer work. We wrote to each other like distant relatives who maintained cordial contact without deeper emotional investment. It was, I realized, exactly the right amount of connection, enough to acknowledge that we had both grown, not enough to pretend that growth could undo the past. On my 76th birthday, I received packages from both Rachel and Emma. Rachel sent me a beautiful orchid, a nod to her stepfather's hobby, and a symbol of delicate beauty that could thrive with proper care. Emma sent me a donation certificate showing that she had made a substantial contribution to a victims' rights organization in my name. Both gifts reflected thoughtfulness and understanding. Rachel's orchid acknowledged the new life I had built, the beauty I had cultivated from difficult circumstances. Emma's donation acknowledged the harm she had caused and her commitment to helping other victims find justice and healing. I displayed the orchid on my kitchen windowsill, next to the succulent Emma had sent years earlier. 2 plants, representing 2 different kinds of hope. The hope for new growth and the hope for meaningful service. That evening, as I was watering my plants and preparing dinner for one, I realized something that would have seemed impossible 25 years ago. I was completely at peace with the strange configuration my family had taken. I had a granddaughter who loved me without needing me to be anything other than myself. I had a daughter who respected me enough to maintain distance while working to become someone worthy of that respect. I had built a life that could accommodate complicated relationships without being defined or diminished by them. The poison didn't kill me. The betrayal didn't break me. And now, even the aftermath of those experiences had resolved into something that enriched rather than diminished my existence. That night, I called Rachel to thank her for the orchid. "I hope it blooms for you," she said. "The care instructions are included, but basically you just need to give it the right amount of water and light and patience. Sounds like raising children."
Rachel laughed. Mom says that's exactly what it's like. She says she learned how to take care of living things properly by practicing on plants first, after she got out of prison. She says it taught her the difference between giving something what you want to give it and giving it what it actually needs. Another lesson Emma had learned too late to apply to our relationship, but early enough to apply to her relationship with Rachel. I said, "She's a good mother," and realized I meant it completely. "She learned from the best," Rachel replied, even if she had to learn it the hard way. After we hung up, I sat with that orchid and thought about the strange circularity of life. 25 years ago, Emma had poisoned me with chemical compounds that slowly destroyed my body. Now she was sending me living plants that required careful tending to flourish. 25 years ago, she had calculated my death as a solution to her financial problems. Now she was donating money to help other victims find support and justice. 25 years ago, she had abandoned me in a hospital bed to take a vacation with money she expected to inherit from my death. Now she was raising a daughter who wanted to spend her life healing sick children. The transformation was real, even if it came too late to save our original relationship. I watered the orchid with careful attention to the amount and temperature of the water, following the care instructions Rachel had provided. Taking care of living things properly, giving them what they need rather than what you want to give them. Emma had finally learned that lesson, and in learning it, she had raised a granddaughter who brought unexpected joy to my carefully constructed solitary life. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the newest chapter of my story. It wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation or happily ever after endings. It was about the possibility of finding meaning and connection even within the boundaries of permanent consequences.
Emma would never again be my daughter in the way she had been for 18 years. The trust that kind of relationship required was gone forever, destroyed by her choices and unable to be rebuilt. But she could be the mother of my granddaughter, the person who had raised a remarkable young woman with wisdom learned through terrible mistakes. I could be proud of who Emma had become without forgetting who she had been. I could love Rachel completely without needing to love her mother. I could acknowledge growth and change without requiring those things to erase the past. These were complex emotional calculations, but they felt sustainable in a way that simpler solutions, complete estrangement, or total forgiveness never had. The story that began with a chemistry teacher collapsing in her classroom had become a story about the chemistry of human relationships, how some bonds can be broken and never reformed, how other bonds can develop between people who share DNA but not history, how love can be transformed without being destroyed. In my garden the next morning, tending plants that had been gifts from a woman who once tried to kill me and a young woman who barely knew me but loved me anyway, I understood that this was what healing actually looked like. Not the restoration of what was lost, but the creation of something new from the elements that remained. Not the reversal of damage, but the transformation of that damage into wisdom, strength, and unexpected forms of connection. I was 76 years old, surrounded by growing things, in communication with family members who honored appropriate boundaries, proud of the life I had built from the ashes of the life that had been taken from me. If that wasn't a successful transformation, I didn't know what was. The story continues, as all real stories do, with no neat endings, but with daily choices to keep growing, keep healing, keep finding meaning in whatever circumstances life presents. And I choose, every day, to keep growing.